Content warning. This series will discuss topics that may bring up painful experiences for you. Please take the time to surround yourself with good medicines. If need be, pause the playback and go for a walk, stretch, have a glass of water, and come back to the show when you feel comfortable. Welcome to the Métis Speaker Series. I'm your host, Darian Kovacs. On this podcast series, we will be exploring learning, healing, and rebuilding within the Métis community. Our goal is to create awareness of and generate discussion about Métis issues, as well as how to heal from and move forward in a healthy way. We hope to reduce Métis invisibility in BC through the personal stories from our Métis community members. This show is brought to you by the Métis Nation of British Columbia and Jelly Marketing.
I couldn't help myself. You gave me everything.
Welcome to another episode of Métis Speaker Series. I'm going to give some context of what we're going to be talking about today with Dean and Carmen as they attended a pretty exciting UN forum on Indigenous issues and Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is a high-level advisory board to the Economic and Social Council, and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, provides a roadmap to advance lasting reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. The yearly forum was established in the year 2000 with the mandate to deal with Indigenous issues related to economic and social development, culture, the environment, education, health, and human rights. This year's forum was held from April 21st to May 2nd, and the theme was implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples within United Nations member states and the United Nations system, including identifying good practice and addressing challenges. UNDRIP sets minimal standards for the survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples. And in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action urged provincial and territorial governments to adopt and implement UNDRIP as a framework for reconciliation. British Columbia was the first jurisdiction in Canada to pass legislation formally adopting UNDRIP into law, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, in 2019. Canada passed the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act in June 2021, which provides a framework for the federal government to advance reconciliation with Indigenous peoples by ensuring federal laws align with the UN Declaration. Without further ado, let's jump right in with Dean and Carmen to learn more about their personal experience. I am so thrilled to have a conversation today with Dean and Carmen, and we're going to talk about some pretty interesting, fascinating stuff to do with all things global, UN, all sorts of things that they discovered and were able to not only represent MNBC on a global scale, but bring back some information for all of us here. So Carmen, I want to start with you. What are the overall key takeaways from the forum that you're a part of? And tell us about the forum in full and what you learned. How is it going to impact your work at MNBC?
Thank you for the question, Darian. The United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues it was pretty outstanding. First of all, to be in a place where human rights are advocated for on such a international level, and also to be with a huge amount of Indigenous people from all over the world. So my takeaways were many, but of course in my role of the Minister of Women and Gender Equity, there were several sessions that we could attend on issues that face Indigenous women around the world. And one of the big things that really struck me was that the genocide of Indigenous women is a problem for Indigenous people across the globe. And that really struck me because it is an issue that I think we know of, we are aware of, but one that we do need to give more attention to, one that we need to be far more intentional about addressing. And one of the other common themes that came up in the sessions that we attended that were specific to Indigenous women was that women are the defenders of human development. So therefore it encompasses so much, right? There's human development, there's food security, policy development, climate policy, maternal health. And just there is a direct link between issues that we take on in our environment with resource extraction that affect maternal health and therefore affect our families and the well-being of Indigenous folks. So that theme stuck with me, and I would like to pass that over to Dean because I'm sure he had more to add.
Yeah, Carmen, well said. I think, as Carmen stated, first of all, my name is Dean Gladue, and I'm the Region 3 Director of Métis Nation BC. I'm also the Minister of Rights and the Métis Minister of Sports and Active Living and the Associate Minister of Justice. So I've got a lot of responsibility within the nation, and especially now that Métis Nation BC has withdrawn from Métis National Council as our representative for our nation. We now have to be our own voice at the international level, national level, and regional level, at all levels. So us being there was more vital than any year in the past that we've been there. A lot of past we've been there. Whoever went from Métis Nation BC was just a side. We just took a seat, allowed Métis National Council to be the voice on our behalf. So we had a limited voice, but this time we had a very strong voice and a strong presence. And I think the biggest thing that I've taken away is really understanding that Indigenous Issues serves as a vital platform for Indigenous peoples to discuss issues affecting their communities. That's the thing that is the common theme, is gives chances for all nations to come and say, what are you facing? What are you challenging? What are issues that are arising within your community? And as Minister Carriere said, there's all of a sudden out of it comes some common themes that are just all over the place. Of course, number one is the environment. Like that to me, that's what I got out of it, is the effect the environment is having on our people, on a global, national, and regional scale, such as hunting and fishing, water, anything that involves, and our people have been here for, since millennium. And when I say our people, are my Indigenous ancestors. And as Métis, we come from two different worlds, European and the First Nations world, and we've created our own language and culture as a result. And this is why we are distinct people. And Métis are the third distinct people in this country. First Nations, Métis, and Inuit are so vital. And we all have a different voice and a different, depending on which part of Canada you come from. And one common theme that I want to say that really hit me was the fact that sometimes a lot of government are not listening to the Indigenous communities. They're not hearing them. They're trying to get their voice saying, once all this industry is gone, once you've mined that mountain, once you've taken all the oil out of the ground, we're still going to be here. The people are still going to be here living off the land for another 1,000 years and taking care of the land. And I think that's the vital part that we have to do, is understanding that we all have a responsibility to take care of the land, not just Indigenous people, but all people in this global that we call Mother Earth. So that's what I've taken out of it, is the urgency that some of these countries are asking, the urgency in their times, especially in South America, where we see a large part of the world where, the rainforests are there and what they're seeing. And just, it's very humbling to see all these nations come together for me and really promote their culture, language, and who they are. And we at Métis Nation BC have a responsibility to be there now. I feel it's not just a checkbox. Yeah, it's nice to go to New York City and make it a holiday. It wasn't a holiday. We put a lot of hours in, the four that did attend, and we made relationships and we made connections. And one connection that I did connect was also in sports, and how, sports is that common thread that brings a lot of cultures and peoples together. And as the Minister of Sports and Active Living, I found that session very interesting. So, and more so. So, yeah, I hope that will kind of give you an idea of the significance of it. And of course, people can Google it, the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and see the different years and the different trends. So there you go.
No, that's great. We'll put a link to that website in the show notes, of course. Now, Carmen, most people don't know, Jamie Black in 2010 started the Red Dress Project, who is a Métis artist. And I don't know if most Métis people know the impact we've had on bringing awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous women. So do you want to speak to that a bit more, about maybe some of the things you've seen, especially as a Métis person who we have a big impact and have a big role in bringing awareness to that issue.
Absolutely. I think as Indigenous women and men, particularly as Métis women and men, we need to fight extra hard to get our voices heard. And as Dean said, that is one of the reasons why attending forums such as the UN Permanent Forum are really important, because if we aren't there, then others speak for us. And as we know, the Métis story is unique, but it's also diverse, right? So I recognize that the issues facing Métis women in the northern part of British Columbia are different, but also similar to Métis women that live in the southern part or even the central part or the coastal parts. So it's really important in terms of advocacy that we are really specific to what we're speaking to. And within the Ministry of Women and Gender Equity, that heavy lifting is starting now with research on gender-based violence. So I urge all community leaders to pay attention, to be connecting with their community women's reps as well as their regional reps, because we really want to make sure that the data that we collect is specific and it's actionable. I also just want to speak back to the forum, where one of the recommendations, the UN General Recommendation 39, it's the rights of Indigenous women and girls. And even in this role, I was not aware of that. So I think it's really important that people understand that the work that's happening at the UN really helps to inform and empower the advocacy that we are doing here at Métis Nation BC. So if you're not familiar with the Recommendation 39, it provides guidance to states, so our federal government, on legislation and policy. And it specifically addresses the intersectional discrimination and their key roles as it affects women as leaders, knowledge bearers, and cultural transmitters. And they do know that women and girls are disproportionately, that's Indigenous women and girls, affected by climate change and environmental degradation and loss of food production and access to safe food and water. So it's a timely issue. It's an issue that's not going away. So in terms of raising awareness, we don't want to just raise awareness on Red Dress Day. We're thankful that that is a spotlight that can really have people tune into the issues, but we need to pay attention to the issues every day. And we need to be very active voice, not only for Métis women in the province of BC, but with our counterparts across the homeland and advocating with federal and provincial governments.
It's amazing, Carmen. Dean, you attended a session on the Commonwealth Sport Declaration on Reconciliation and Partnership with Indigenous Peoples. Can you tell us on why this declaration is so important and why Indigenous youth in sports is needed?
Well, once again, it's just to get a voice out there. And we, when you look at the Commonwealth Games, we are a Commonwealth country. And it's just helping. I believe sports plays a major role in all youth, first of all. But I look at Indigenous youth who are, especially like myself, and I use myself as an example of what sports played in my life. Sports played an important role of me where I'm at. It was a way for me to stay focused, stay disciplined. And I considered myself when I was younger an elite athlete. I was very fortunate to play at a high level of various sports, and everything I did, it seems that it came natural for me, baseball, hockey, whatever it would be. And all of that created a lot of leadership skills with me and responsibilities. And if we as Indigenous people can put more dollars, and I mean that, more government dollars into sports, we can help kids. My saying is keep kids in sport to keep them out of court. My background, I spent 26 years in the RCMP as a police officer, and having seen as a police all the ins and outs and the good things and the bad things. And the good things that I've seen as a police officer was when I was always involved with coaching and so forth, and really working with Indigenous youth was my passion, and especially high risk Indigenous youth. And as a result, I've seen a lot of them come out of it. I've seen our Indigenous youth excel. So us at the highest level advocating that government with more dollars, and if we can get it at the UN level, encouraging countries like Canada to put more money, into sports, I think will pay off immensely. Rather than opening up more detention centers or whatever it would be, it's the first stage of prevention. When you look at crime and things, it's prevention goes a long ways for all youth. And again, I don't want to just say it's that all youth are high risk. No, they're not. We have a lot of our Indigenous youth that just need a hand up, who want to play at the elite level, and that's another interest that we've taken, especially those youth that have come to the elite level who need our support. We'll help them what we can. We'll do what we can, and we're already doing that in BC. And one example that I'm going to pull out, and I know they wouldn't mind me mentioning her name, is Danica Maynard, who's one of the top female under 18 hockey players in Canada, who just got a ride to Penn State University, played for Canada's U18 national team, who won gold in Finland. And, us supporting there and her, it really helped. And she said it, it gave her a lot more confidence. So from no matter what, and most of these kids in sports are not going to make it to the big leagues or make it to the show, whatever, how you want to put it, if it's hockey, baseball. But what we do want to do is encourage them to continue and also be there so that racism doesn't rear its ugly head because of their skin color or who they are, that they're being overlooked, that, they're being judged by their true skill set and not because of that. So being there at the highest form, it just sets an example and it sets a train. And the other thing is you also see how far Canada is. Even though we have a ways to go, I have to say Canada is pretty good as a country, what we do for our youth, our youth in Indigenous sports. There's a lot of countries that do put no money into their Indigenous peoples. So that's what you learn. That's what comes out of it at the international level. And I say, I work at the national level, but when you go to the international level, you start to see some real holes in a lot. We still have a ways to go. So
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Dean. You both had the opportunity to watch a screening of Oscar-nominated film Sugarcane. Can you tell me about the film and what it was like watching that for the first time?
The movie was unbelievable. It was really, for me personally, it hit a lot of personal chords for me because my mother was a residential school survivor. Is a residential. She's still alive, and that's my story that they shared as well. I have a story to share. It was about a young man coming home to his home base and confronting the things that have hurt him as a child, but also helping his father confront his demons from residential school. And that's the same journey that I took with my mother, with my family, learning about residential school in 1993. And then here we are today in 2025, and people are, and recently in Kamloops, we had, the day of reckoning, I call it, when the residential school became a national, international story just in the last few years. And
that was right in your backyard.
That's correct. 2 miles from exactly where I'm sitting right now and I live 2 miles from that as the crow flies. But I look at that and it's a humbling experience when you see it. And for me, it hits a deeper emotion because I can feel the power of my ancestors in there, my mother and her family. Because, and again, there's a perception that First Nations and Inuit were the only ones, but Métis were affected. And within residential school within this country. But a lot of Métis fled. A lot of Métis left their communities and they had to hide their identity. And that's the other thing that we're still dealing with in today's. So the impact of the residential school in a lot of ways is still today. It's still impacting us today. And we're slowly seeing a rise of those taken, saying they're proud to be Indigenous. They're proud to be Métis. They're proud to be First Nation, Shwapmic, whatever community they come from. So that movie really was emotional for me. If I saw it for the first time, if I was my first time of reckoning about residential school, I probably would have been a nervous wreck after that. Because I recall myself in 1993 when I first heard about residential schools at a university course, I had to go through an osmosis of healing, and so here we are in 2025, and we're now becoming more aware of it and talking about it. And I think that's where the healing starts. When we can say Canada was not as pretty of a country as it is. And my wife, who was from South Africa, always perceived that Canada was one of those countries that didn't have those historical wrongs. But then when she learns that in 1952, South African government came to Canada and to understand its system of segregation, and they used our process of segregation. So that's, I got to say, it was well done. I liked the way it was done in a documentary. It was done in a storytelling rather than in an interview process. It was following people, which engaged you and kept you on the edge of your seat, so to speak. But I was able to share my story and my healing journey as well. So I'll let Carmen a little bit about no, I'll go on what she said, because from her perspective of the movie.
Thanks, Dean. For me, it was my second time seeing the movie. I watched it alone in my living room, so it was really nice to be with a group of people. It was really impactful to be with the filmmaker and to understand the process of storytelling and how the project actually came about and how it unfolded in a direction that maybe they weren't sure it was going to go in when they first started talking about the project. And that tends to be the way with storytelling. So that was really impactful to understand how the project came about. The creative process was amazing. The two filmmakers embedded themselves right into the community. And as we know in Indigenous communities, it's all about relationship. So they made sure that they established that relationship. So I think some cultural underpinnings that as Métis people we can also relate to were really evident in just the process and how it came about. The story itself was, a word I'll use is brutal, right? It was beautiful and brutal at the same time. I think it was a reminder that we need to be gentle with ourselves as Métis people. We need to be gentle to those who've come before us because they endured a different trajectory than we have, although we are part of that string. It was really impactful for all of us as a group who were there to talk about it and to share afterwards. Dean and I are both intergenerational survivors. My grandmother was a residential school survivor. So I think one of the lenses that it gave me was to understand maybe the harshness that she moved in the world, or the harshness that I knew her story to be as my grandmother, which was not necessarily who she was wholly. So it was a reminder to remember that there's more to the story and to give grace. So it was a beautiful piece of cinematography on top of it. So I highly recommend.
That's amazing. That's incredible. And just people are hearing about this and hearing about MNBC's involvement. Why should MNBC keep showing up in these events, venues, spaces, and having a presence and a voice there?
Yes, well, I'm the elected chair for Métis Women BC and also hold the portfolio for women and gender equity and the Ministry of Health and Wellness. So both of those topics in terms of what my ministries encompass were covered at the permanent forum. And as I think we spoke to earlier, it's really important to have representation because our voice is unique. Our story is a shared story, but it's a unique story. So we need to speak to the social determinants of health that impact our people. So while, like I said, we have a shared story with the Métis Nation broader, the impacts of those social determinants, the experience may be slightly different than somebody in Vancouver to somebody who's in Northern Alberta. So that's why it's really important that Métis Nation BC, as the democratically elected body to speak for folks here in BC, shows up and represents well. The other comment I will make is that it was really important for us to network and to make those connections with Indigenous people across Turtle Island. I had the opportunity to connect with other Indigenous leaders, with Bob Ray, the ambassador, Canadian ambassador to the UN, and that was impactful and powerful. We understand the UN's commitment, particularly from the Canadian voice, to advancing the rights of Indigenous people. It's really important for Métis Nation BC to be showing up in these spaces because we are still in a battle with our Section 35 rights and to have that self-government recognition. And finally, I would say as a collective, like when you're part of these bigger discussions with Indigenous people across the world, it shows us our collective responsibility to one another. If one of us fails, all of us will fail. If all of us move forward together, then our voices are stronger together. And with our Métis teachings, Wakotoan, we are connected. It is our responsibility to look after the lands and the creatures and the planet and all the folks that we live with, whether that be close to home or far away. So I just think it's part of a collective responsibility. It's a solutions-based event, so it's not just people talking. We're talking about solutions. We're talking about political advocacy and how we can work with governments internationally, nationally, and locally to advance the well-being of Indigenous folks.
That's
Well
awesome.
said,
Dean.
Minister
Yeah.
Carrier. And as she said, I think our impact being there is important because I'll just keep mine short because pretty well she said everything that I would like to say. But the rebirth of a nation is what comes to mind. When we were there, we were talking about next year going back, making a bigger splash, and letting people know that Métis Nation BC has taken the reins of its own destiny. Opisawakamek, we govern ourselves. And that's the significance of us going there, is showing that we're distinct, we're a nation that needs to be heard, and we have issues that evolve. We have close to 30,000 registered Métis Nation members, MNBC members now, as of today. The last census that Canada took, there was 99,000 self-identified as Métis in this province. Now, and that's important is for people to understand what is Métis, who are Métis. Métis are not just mixed blood. We come from a distinct culture, language, and a peoples. In Red River, other distinct traditional Métis communities throughout Western Canada as well. Like my family come from Lake St. Anne, then journeyed to Kelly Lake, which is in northeastern British Columbia. And we are still living off the land. There are still family that we have much value to the land. I myself was born as a road allowance child, and it's important to understand what is road allowance. That in itself is a whole discussion. So going there and telling our story to the world, and that Canada is just not one, it is one beautiful big country, but with distinct nations throughout it, Indigenous nations, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Thanks.
It's incredible. Anything else you want to share with listeners?
That's a really good question. I would love to see our nation commit to continuing to go to the permanent forum. But having said that, I hope that our citizens and our people pay attention because given the political situation south of the border, there were a lot of concerns. There were some of our fellow Indigenous participants from other countries were denied entry. So it's a real concern. So I think the broader discussion is how do we, as Indigenous people around the world, as a collective, advocate for better circumstances, for better access, for better representation, because it's a challenging time in the world politically where I think Indigenous rights are really being infringed upon. And we really need to move carefully, we need to move thoughtfully, we need to move with intention, and we need to move as a collective while recognizing that we have distinctions as we approach these political discussions. So it's something we need to continue to do, but I think we need to kind of pan out and think about how we do that in a good way with other folks.
For me, it was just the experience of being at the United Nations headquarters, sitting amongst countries throughout the world and realizing and looking at their different regalia, cultural backgrounds, and thinking, we are so lucky to be a part of this experience. But then I put even though I was very fortunate to be there, it's the very reason why we are there is because of inequities, because of things that happen throughout the world that we're able to come together. This was the 25th forum, sitting forum, 24th, I believe. 24th or 25th. I believe it started in 2000. But every year they come together and try to have a stronger voice. This year was very interesting, and as Minister Carriere said, especially with the current situation in the U.S., the current climate there, you can really feel there was tension there. There was a sense of, oh my, where are we going? Where's our future going? I was disappointed in the U.S. presence, even though we were on their territory. Even the United States, each country would have a say, would have some input into it. I was taken back by, I'm not going to get too much into it because I could tear it apart, but I was just taken back by the message from the United States. And it was not to be desired. In fact, nobody clapped. We saw people we saw after people had said something very powerful, there was a loud applause right on, but the message almost there was the feeling of people were holding their breath. So I hope we're not moving backwards as a society. I believe we need to move forward. And my concern would be, yes, we go to New York City, United Nations, but again, is that going to continue to be a friendly place for Indigenous people to go in the next year and the year after that? I pray and say I hope so. But that's what I took out of it, is that we have to have our ears open and really be involved. And this is just not it's nice to go, good for you. I found it very enlightening, and it helped me to understand even more so the importance of my role coming back to British Columbia as the Minister of Rights, especially, and my responsibility as a rights minister, but also carrying that and encouraging. It's not just my responsibility. It becomes, how do I convey to everybody this is everybody's responsibility? Because if I come back and say, oh, it's my responsibility, well, it's never going to go anywhere. But if we all take the attitude, what's the little bit I can do to ensure our voices are heard? And I think that's the key message that I want to bring back to the listeners is really understand. Like, I would encourage you to go on social media and Google United Nations Forum on Indigenous Issues and see what goes on there at that international level. It was money well spent by our nation because we're coming back with a lot more information and action, and not just sitting on it. We're acting on it. And I think that's the biggest thing. So act on it. And we've got Carmen and I, Minister Carriere and I are on the political side.
Darian, if I could just add one more thing. I feel that one of the things that was good for Dean and I as ministers was to really learn how UNDRIP is being applied, right? There's a real application to UNDRIP. It's not just a document. It's something that we can take and we can really use in our advocacy as ministers and as citizens. So as Minister Gladue said, it was an important education, and it was just a reminder of our responsibility as elected representatives to do the work to advance our rights here in British Columbia, as well as our Indigenous kin around the world.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to share, Dean?
I think, I think we need to go back next year.
And we need to go back with, I think, cultural representation as well, right? We need to showcase who we are as Métis people and the beauty of our people, our culture. And there was some representation for other nations there, but I would love to see more representation of the Métis Nation.
That's incredible. Thank you both for sharing. Thank you for sharing about what's going on. And I think much like icebergs, sometimes we just see the tip of what MNBC is up to. So to see the bigger picture and what you're doing on these trips and the information you're bringing and sharing globally is pretty incredible.
Thank you. Thank you for featuring us.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate this, and hope we can do it again on other topics.
Yeah. If there's anything else you want to share, it'd be lovely. This was so great to kind of know what's happening with MNBC, traveling the world, bringing the information, sharing about it. This was the Métis Speaker Series. Thanks so much for joining us on this week's episode, and we'll see you next time on the show. This has been the Métis Speaker Series podcast. I'm Darian Kovacs. Thanks to Métis Nation BC for making this possible. You can listen to all of our episodes, learn more about the podcast, and sign up to the Métis Nation of BC newsletter to stay up to date on Métis news at métispodcastseries.ca. You can find out more about the music we're playing by Love Life by visiting SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/lovelifeofficial, LUVLYF official, and link in the show notes for your convenience. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast listening device. See you again soon. Mina Kawapa Mitten. Thank you. Marci for listening.